Before we begin, I want to ask you an honest question. If you got a 50% raise tomorrow, would you finally feel at peace with your money? Or would you just end up with more expensive problems to solve? My brother in law makes $340,000 a year. He hasn't slept a full night in 4 months. I want you to sit with that for a second because it breaks every mental model you were handed growing up. $340,000. That's more than 6 times the median American household income. He has a house in a zip code where the lawns look like they were drawn by architects, 2 cars, kids in private school, a financial advisor who calls him by his first name. And he told me over a beer on a Tuesday, looking like a man who'd lost something he couldn't name, that he doesn't know what he's doing any of it for anymore. Now, let me tell you about John. John makes $67,000 a year as a high school history teacher in Knoxville, Tennessee. He drives a 2016 Civic with 94,000 miles on it. He rents. His vacations are camping trips where the total budget, including gas, is under $400. And every single time I've talked to John in the last 5 years, he sounds like someone who just got back from exactly where he wanted to be. Same country, same cost of goods, same news cycle full of reasons to be anxious. Completely opposite psychological experience of money. The obvious response is to say John just has lower standards or that he's not ambitious. And that's where most people stop thinking, because going deeper would force them to admit something uncomfortable, that the thing they're chasing might not work the way they think it does. There's a study out of Princeton, real data, tens of thousands of people, that found emotional well-being essentially stops improving at around $75,000 in annual income. After that point, more money doesn't register as more happiness in your daily lived experience. You might feel more important, more secure on paper, more capable of impressing the right people at the right dinner. But happiness, the actual texture of your day, the way you feel waking up on a Wednesday with nothing special happening, that flatlines. Now, there's been follow-up research suggesting that number scales higher when you're in certain expensive cities, or when you account for income relative to peers. The details matter. But the core finding has held up for 20 years. Past a certain threshold, the correlation between money and emotional well-being goes from strong to nearly invisible. The number varies. $75,000 in Knoxville might feel like $130,000 in San Francisco. But the pattern doesn't. This is what nobody teaches you. Not because they're hiding it, it's because the entire economic machinery of this country functions on the assumption that you don't fully absorb this. Your employer needs you to want the raise bad enough to stay late. The bank needs you to want the house bad enough to take the 30-year mortgage. The car company needs you to want the upgrade bad enough to finance something you can't actually afford. The whole system is architected around a single, simple belief that more is always better, that enough doesn't exist, that the goal line keeps moving. And here's the thing. For most people, it does keep moving. Not because of some conspiracy, but because of something buried in the operating system of human psychology. It's called hedonic adaptation. You get the raise, you adjust to the raise becomes the floor. And now you need the next raise to feel what the last raise felt like. My brother-in-law started at $80,000. Then $120,000 felt like the answer. Then he hit $200,000 and the goalpost moved again. Now he's at $340,000 and he's thinking, I kid you not, that if he could just get to $500,000, things would settle down. They won't. This isn't a lecture about materialism being bad or about living like a monk on brown rice and tap water. This is something more specific. There is an actual calculable number for most people beyond which additional income produces zero additional peace of mind. And most people not only don't know what that number is for them, they've never even tried to find it. What if the most valuable financial calculation you ever did wasn't about your retirement account or your investment returns, but about the exact number your life actually costs, not the life you're performing for Instagram, your actual life. Because if you don't know your number, you'll never know when you've hit it. And if you never know when you've hit it, you'll spend your whole career running a race with no finish line. That's not ambition. That's just a hamster wheel with better branding. What I'm going to lay out next is the actual architecture of enough, not as a philosophy, as a framework with numbers. Because you can know this, you just haven't been given the tools to think about it clearly. The first thing you need to understand is what I call the baseline tax. This is the minimum monthly cost of your actual life functioning without chronic stress. Not your aspirational life, not the life where you're comfortable, but also do the thing you've always wanted to do. The baseline: rent or mortgage, utilities, food, transportation, insurance, basic healthcare, phone, internet. That's it. Most Americans have never sat down and calculated this number honestly. When I ask people what their monthly expenses are, they almost always undercount by 20 to 40%. Subscriptions they forgot about, the recurring charges buried in their bank statement, the occasional expenses that happen every single month like clockwork. Run the actual number. For most single adults outside major metros, it lands between $2,800 and $3,900 a month. For couples in mid-sized cities, $4,500 to $6,200. This is the floor. And once you know your floor, you can stop panicking about everything above it. The second mechanism, income inflation lag. Here's how it actually works in practice. You make $60,000. Your lifestyle costs $45,000. That's a $15,000 annual gap. Real breathing room. Then you get promoted. Now you make $85,000. Within 18 months, your lifestyle costs $78,000. The gap shrinks to $7,000. You're making more and feel more broke. Why? Because raises don't just hit your bank account, they hit your sense of entitlement. Suddenly the apartment feels small. Suddenly the car feels embarrassing for someone at your level. The raise doesn't improve your life, it inflates your reference point. This one is brutal, and most people won't see it in themselves, even when I describe it this way. The stress to dollar curve is the counterintuitive one. Take someone making $50,000 with a relatively simple financial life. Now take someone making $150,000, managing a mortgage, private school tuition, 2 car payments, a home equity line, and the social obligations that come with a certain neighborhood. The person at $50,000 might actually carry less total financial anxiety because their system is simpler. High income doesn't automatically mean low financial stress. It sometimes means expensive problems instead of cheap problems. The comparison radius matters more than most people admit. Your subjective sense of wealth isn't measured against the whole country. It's measured against the 5 to 15 people closest to you in life. If your best friends all make $90,000 and you make $70,000, you feel behind. If your circle makes $55,000 and you make $70,000, you feel ahead. Same income, completely different psychological experience. This is why moving to a cheaper city often makes people feel richer, even without a raise. The comparison radius shrinks. The gap closes. The time cost equation is something almost nobody solves correctly. A $200,000 salary that requires 70-hour work weeks and 40 weeks of travel per year costs you something money can't buy back. A $95,000 salary with hard boundaries and genuine control over your schedule might produce more actual lived quality of life. When you account for the real hourly rate, total income divided by total hours the job actually consumes, including commute, recovery time, email at 10 p.m., a lot of high-paying jobs become worse deals than they appear. Run that math on your own situation before you read the next line. I'll wait. The enough number itself, Research across multiple countries consistently shows that life satisfaction, not just emotional well being, but genuine satisfaction with how your life is going, peaks somewhere between 1.5 times and 2.5 times the median household income in your local area. Below the median, stress dominates. Above 2.5 times median, additional income produces diminishing returns so small they're essentially noise. In Knoxville, the median household income is around $52,000. Two times that is $104,000. John, at $67,000, is close enough to that band that his financial life doesn't feel scarce. My brother-in-law, at $340,000, is so far above that band that money has stopped being the variable that controls his quality of life at all. His problem now is different. It's identity, purpose, time, and more money won't touch any of that. The lifestyle lock-in is the trap nobody sees until they're in it. Once you buy the house in the expensive neighborhood, you're locked in. Once the kids are in private school, you can't move them without a family crisis. Once you've built a life at a certain spending level, reducing it feels like failure, even when scaling back would objectively make you happier. Lifestyle costs in one direction. It almost never scales back down voluntarily. This is why the spending decisions you make between 28 and 35 are the most consequential financial decisions of your entire life. And most people make them with almost no deliberate thought. One more, the scarcity loop. When you don't have a clear enough number, your brain treats financial security as something that always requires more. It's not logical, it's neurological. Uncertainty about whether you have enough activates the same threat response systems as actual scarcity. People with $1.2 million in savings who have never defined what enough looks like still feel financially anxious. Defining the number is itself a financial intervention. It's the only way to tell your nervous system that you've actually arrived. Here's what this actually looks like if you start doing something about it instead of just nodding along. This week, one task: calculate your real monthly baseline number, not your current spending, your actual minimum viable life cost. Open every bank and credit card statement from the last 3 months. Every line item. Add what's truly essential. Remove what's aspirational or habitual, but not necessary. Get an honest number. For most people, this process takes about 90 minutes and produces a number that surprises them. Usually it's lower than they thought. That number is your floor. It's also the beginning of your answer to what enough actually means for you. This month, map your current income against the stress curve. Ask yourself honestly, at what monthly take-home do you stop having conversations with yourself at 2 a.m. about money? Not where you'd feel rich, where you'd feel done panicking. For most people, that number exists. They've just never named it. Write it down. Actual number. Then calculate the gap between where you are and where that number is. That gap is your real financial goal, not more, not as much as I can make, but a specific, concrete, achievable target. This quarter, audit your comparison radius. Look at the 5 people you spend the most social time with. What do their lives cost? How does that compare to yours? This isn't about cutting off friends. It's about understanding how much of your financial anxiety is generated by proximity to people whose lifestyle expenses are simply not yours. Some people find that the most effective financial decision they made in a decade was spending more time with people whose version of a good life cost less, not poorer people, people who had made different trade-offs. This year, stress test your lifestyle lock-in. If your income dropped 30% tomorrow, what would actually break? What would be painful but survivable? What would be genuinely catastrophic? Most people don't know the answer to these questions, and the not knowing is itself a source of anxiety. The people who've done this exercise, who've actually mapped their financial fragility, almost always end up making 1 or 2 structural changes that reduce their cost base. and dramatically increase their peace of mind. It doesn't feel good to look at this stuff. It feels worse to never look at it. Now, the long game. 10 years of chasing the moving goalpost looks like this: higher income, higher expenses, roughly the same level of financial stress, a growing net worth on paper that somehow never feels like security. You've worked harder, earned more, and arrived somewhere that feels almost identical to where you started emotionally. 10 years of knowing your number looks like a clear ceiling on lifestyle spending, real savings rate that compounds, the ability to make career decisions based on what you actually want rather than what you're financially trapped into needing. 20 years in, the difference between those two trajectories isn't just psychological, it's structural. One person has built optionality, they can take the risk, walk away from the bad job, say no to the thing that pays well, but costs everything else. The other person is still running, still adding to the number they've never quite defined. My brother in law called me last week. He's thinking about leaving his firm and going back to something smaller, something that pays maybe $180,000. He said it like a confession, like he was admitting to something shameful. I asked him what was stopping him. He said, I don't know if it's enough. He'd never done the math. He'd been chasing a number he'd never actually calculated. So here's what I want you to do right now before you scroll to the next thing. Drop your number in the comments. Not what you make, not what you think you should make. The monthly number that, if it just showed up in your account every single month reliably with no job to lose, would make you feel like you could actually breathe. What's your enough? Because until you can say the number out loud, you don't actually know what you're running toward.